guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Trespass on Farmer's Property? I'll build a 200-foot poop wall to teach you about boundaries. TLDR. New neighbor moves in and thinks he is better than everyone else. Tries to call cops of me for just doing my farm chores and using my machines. Coming onto my property whenever he felt like it and destroying things was the final straw. I build a 200-foot fence of cow manure to separate the two properties. The smell was so bad to him that he moved back away, and I was left with a ton of fertilizer for my crops while I wait for someone new, and hopefully nicer, to move in. This story will show you that messing with a farmer and his land is a bad idea. Especially if the farmer has too much time on his hands and doesn't like to let people get away with things. Now, as you can probably tell by now, the farmer in this story is me, and my family has owned my land for a few generations. About 20 years back, though, we ended up splitting the land in half and selling the other part of the land for much needed money at the time. Since then, a few different people have lived there, the most recent being neighbor. I don't know much about him other than the fact that he is from the city and a complete jerk. I'm willing to give anyone a chance, hell, sometimes I will even give them a second. This guy though just didn't seem to know when to stop and leave well enough alone. This guy loved to brag about his money and that to him the piece of land was cheap, which of course ticked me off internally. When you work hard and have somebody come and talk about how they have all this easy money just to clearly show off, it can be annoying. So right away, personality-wise, this guy was not connecting well personality-wise with my farm boy raised personality. Then things started to escalate when I was getting the cops called on me by none other than neighbor. I was confused the first time the cops rang my doorbell and I thought something terrible happened. Officer. Mr. My name. Me. Yes? Did something happen? Officer. We got a noise complaint about some farm equipment running this morning. They claim that there is some written contract that you won't do it in the morning. Even the officer seemed really confused because this was farm country, a ton of machines were being used early in the morning. Me. I don't know what you are talking about. I never signed anything about not using my things. Morning is when I get the majority of the farm work done like everyone else. They were nice and left me alone to continue with my day. I think if they are called they have to come out even though they knew it was a waste of their time. I wish I could say that was the only time they were called on me, but it wasn't. They came again and again, ranging from noise complaints to allegations that I had planted drugs, which I hadn't, and they figured that out quickly, even a call that I was making my cows moo. That one I didn't even know what it meant, and neither did the officer that showed up to my farm. Since he is the only other person in this story, it wouldn't take you long to realize that neighbor was the one doing this. If that wasn't bad enough, he was doing it on my end as well. I guess since the police obviously couldn't do anything to help him stop me from breaking rules that don't exist, he was going to try and bully me. Neighbor. You know that lawnmowers before 8 a.m. aren't allowed in this state. Me. Actually, they are. Mornings are times for farm chores in this area. Neighbor. Well, you know, in city, people weren't allowed to make noise like that so early in the morning. And on Sundays it wasn't allowed at all because it's supposed to be holy. Me. I don't really know what you expect me to do. Start my day late and let my animals go hungry because you don't like the noises of the city within the city. That seemed to shut him up, but only for a couple of days. He also had a bad habit of walking onto my property since there was no actual divide between the two. I constantly had to tell him to please get back onto his property, only to be told that there was no fence, so there was nothing I could do about him being there. It wouldn't have been too bad except for the fact whenever he was on my property things would get messed up. That was when I decided I had enough of this guy, and I was going to get my revenge. He had unknowingly given me the idea of how I was going to get back at him and keep him off my property. Now just a note that on my property I have both animals and crops. It's just on a bit of a smaller scale than one would think compared to one of those giant farms. Still, it was enough that what I was planning was allowed to happen. I decided that if he wanted a fence built, then I was going to build one. This guy didn't wake up until almost noon, so I had plenty of time to make an entire fence out of poop the entire 200 feet of our property. To be specific, it was cow manure which I used as fertilizer. When he woke up and saw it, he was fuming and came over to me, using the front entrance for once. Neighbor. What the hell is that? I decided to try and play dumb. Me. What are you talking about? Neighbor. The giant wall of smelly cow manure. What the hell did you do to my property? Me. Don't worry, I checked the property line and the entire this is on my side. Neighbor. Get rid of it right now. There is no way that biohazard out there is legal. Me. Actually, our state allows me to keep an outdoor supply of manure as long as I am using it as fertilizer, which I am. Neighbor. The smell is seeping into my yard, and I have to keep the windows shut to not smell it. You need to get rid of it right now. Me. It's a country thing, you will get used to the farm life soon enough instead of that horrible city with those crappy rules you keep telling me about. He realizes that talking to the growing sarcastic me wasn't going to work and instead tried to sue me to get rid of the poop pile. He had no case though, and it was found that since it was my property I was allowed to keep what they deemed a manure pile. I would have called it a fence, but either way the property line now had a clear marker on it and was more than enough on my side. I will admit that the smell wasn't great, but I had a much higher tolerance than neighbor did. Neighbor ended up moving about 2 weeks later because he couldn't handle the smell in country life any longer. I'm assuming he went back to the city where most of the rich snobs like him tended to live. Nobody has moved into the new property yet, but I am slowly making my way through the manure fence. It makes for a great fertilizer and it's actually super convenient for me. It just goes to show that if you want to start up with a farmer about his chores and his land, then you are going to be in for a huge dose of revenge. The next story is titled, My Dad is in the Hospital, and it doesn't look good. I'm his only next of kin on paper and he doesn't have a will, but I have a half-brother, I think. New York City, Washington State, New Jersey. TLDR. What do you do when you need to make decisions about your parents' care? What do you do to prepare an estate in a situation like this? Can anyone provide guidance on how to navigate NYC unions? About the locations in the title. My dad lives in New York State. He works for and is currently hospitalized in NYC. I live in WA State. My half-brother lives in New Jersey. I got a phone call yesterday that my dad had collapsed while at work with a seizure. He then had a heart attack and coded 3 times. They found a blood clot in his lung apparently, which the doctors think caused his heart attack. This is all very out of the blue as my dad has always been physically fit. He's 64 years old, though, so I guess things might be changing. The doctors are not optimistic about his prognosis. For 20 years, I thought I was his only child. 6 years ago, my dad sat me down and said he might have a 40-year-old son from a relationship he had when he was 17. There has never been a DNA test or anything, but my brother looks just like my dad. My brother and I are on good terms and text here and there. My brother and my dad are not on good terms and my dad doesn't really recognize him as blood. I was listed as his only emergency contact when the hospital called me. I'm likely the only person on any employer life insurance policies he has. On paper, my brother does not exist to my dad. I have no idea where to even start about what to do besides file for FMLA for myself and on my dad's behalf with our respective employers. I don't know how much say my brother gets about his medical care or what to do if my dad dies. He does not have a will or any medical directives as far as I know, but I'm going to look for that paperwork, if it exists, when I get to his house later today. Would his estate still go through probate if I'm his only established next of kin on paper? Who decides dad's care? I have a background in HR benefits, so I kind of know where to start there. But my dad works for NYC as a city carpenter and I've never dealt with unions before, especially not an NYC carpenters union. Update. I'm sorry about the length, I'm just so angry and frustrated about this entire situation and needed to get it out. The first thing I want to say to you all is if you have any assets, make a ducking will. I don't care if you think it'll all automatically go to your spouse or your kids, so it doesn't matter, or that you've mentioned that you want to be buried instead of cremated, so you think you're covered. You're not covered. It's not automatic. Go make a ducking will. Also, make sure you have listed beneficiaries on your retirement and bank accounts. Otherwise, that money will be sitting there while your loved ones scramble to create an estate with the courts, because that's the only place that money can legally go. I'm sure it's obvious, but my dad ended up passing away. He had a pulmonary embolism that stressed his heart too much. He coded 3 times before being stabilized by the hospital. but he was down for 30 minutes or so without oxygen to his brain, which resulted in brain death. He was declared legally dead at 63 years old, and he was in great health before this. I stayed in New York for the next month trying to tie up loose ends. His house was a nightmare. He was a moderate hoarder who had stuffed his house and garage to the gills over the past 30 years. It wasn't newspapers and rats bad, but it was like klepto bad. He just saved so many things that weren't even his. Oh, and to add to all of this, my dad supposedly had bedbugs, so I had to pay for a nearby hotel for 4 weeks. I had to call in a ton of favors from people who very much did not like my dad, namely my mom, my dad's brother, and my friends. The first problem we ran into was that there was no legal way to drop a dumpster on my dad's property. The owner of the house needed to go down to City Hall and request one, and the dumpster needed to have a surety bond. And we couldn't make dump runs because my dad's truck was jerry-rigged and we couldn't figure out what he had done to it and why it wouldn't start. So, we threw trash in the yard for 2 weeks until we found a friend of a friend of a friend who would haul it away on the down low. In the meantime, my dad lived in a crap area, so we started having addicts store their supplies among the trash, and my dad's tenants were also adding to the yard garbage. Throughout all of this, I was also having to go through every piece of paper in the house trying to find important documents, assets, debts, and accounts. I had to go through so many boxes and bags of papers he had clearly shoveled off the kitchen table and just thrown in the basement over the years. Right, so my dad had live-in tenants. They lived upstairs, my dad lived downstairs. They were understandably cagey about my dad dying since it meant they effectively didn't have a landlord or maintenance man anymore. However, their hot water heater broke maybe a week after I got there. I knew that my dad had jerry-rigged the hot water heaters to be connected in some way. Upstairs was oil, downstairs was gas, but it was so messed up that I eventually ended up having to hire a professional to replace the oil hot water heater and fix the plumbing in the basement since the water was also coming into the house at double the recommended max PSI. That was a few grand down the drain. A few other weird things happened, like them getting into a feud with my dad's girlfriend, telling me someone was in the house playing drums in the middle of the night, and demanding I hire a plumber on a Sunday night for a clogged tub drain instead of them using Drano, but the tenants ended up moving out 2 months later. Legally, I didn't have to help the tenants, but I also wasn't really supposed to be collecting rent on my dad's behalf either, so I was glad when they left. My dad's daily car had problems from day one. I had to pick it up from his job, which was fine, but after about 2 weeks, this 4-cylinder car started dieseling and eventually threw a rod. My last week there, my mom and I had to drive a rental. My dad still owed money on the car, so I had the bank tow it away. It truly was one thing after another the entire time I was in New York. My dad also had a classic muscle car in the garage that he had obtained under less than legal means. He didn't have any paperwork indicating ownership and he had cut all the VIN tags out decades ago. It was beat to shit, hadn't been touched in over 40 years, and I didn't live anywhere nearby, so I ended up selling it to a nearby specialist shop under less than legal means. I eventually had to hire a lawyer because I found conflicting paperwork in the house that he may have a second mortgage. According to court documents, the 2 mortgages were supposed to be merged, but I don't think this ever happened, and the second mortgage has been buried so deep in that bank's archives that the bank hasn't asked for money in a decade, and they couldn't find it in their systems initially. But the balance still exists. I also needed a lawyer to navigate the situation with my half-brother. I ended up meeting my brother for the first time face to face through this whole ordeal. He's absolutely my dad's son. He looks more like him than I do. He's got a huge heart. His mom is also a total sweetheart, and it's cool to have a brother because I didn't think I had any siblings until I was an adult. But he's kind of a mess, so he wasn't really much help during all of this. Dad isn't on his birth certificate, so I asked him to waive his claim to Dad's estate, which he did. In return, I'm going to give him half of Dad's house, which was his only real asset. I did this because my lawyer told me it would move things along more quickly in court. As far as Dad's benefits, he had a small death benefit, which I received after I came home that helped a lot with my costs in NY. He also had a pension and 3 other retirement accounts. I was named beneficiary on the pension, which has taken NYC over 7 months to distribute it to me. The other 3 retirement accounts did not have named beneficiaries, but one went to me under the company's policies. The remaining 2 are sitting in limbo until I get letters of administration with the court. Speaking of things sitting in limbo, Dad also has 3 timeshares that I can't do anything about. I can't sell the house, I can't cash checks addressed to him, I can't pay off his car loan, and I'm illegally accessing his bank account to autopay a handful of bills. The bank that holds his primary mortgage told me they would give me access to the court documents to find out what happened to his second mortgage only after I started a death claim. The only thing that happened after I started a death claim was that I'm now locked out of that account. They won't talk to me about the mortgage or the house, and now they're threatening to foreclose. I've been throwing them some money here and there from Dad's bank account, but that account is starting to run really dry. I also have to pay the city water, sewer, and trash quarterly through my own bank account, despite knowing I'm not legally responsible for my dad's bills, because they only take checks and apparently forgery is where I draw the line. It has been over 7 months since my dad died. It has been almost 5 months since my lawyer filed a petition for letters of administration with the county court and we haven't even been granted a hearing yet. The only things I've really accomplished are cleaning out a majority of the house and closing some accounts. My window to sell the house before winter is slowly closing. I am so tired and angry and frustrated all of the time. I haven't even gone into the emotional aspect of all of this because for a while, I didn't even have the bandwidth for it. I went hoarse speaking to family members who didn't even show up to the services. I was interrupted every time I tried to eat because someone or something was always calling me or needing my attention. The hospital was a complete and utter shit show because this was in November in NYC during the height of COVID. The only help I received was when I begged for it from my very close friends and family. His friends, who have all known me since I was a child, didn't lift a finger to help me and I was not quiet about how much of a project his house was. My mom, my uncle, and I all experienced PTSD being in that house because my dad was not a good person. I had nobody to support me at dad's services because my mom and uncle refused to go and my brother showed up 2 hours late, but I still had to put on a, literal and figurative, mask and play the role of grieving daughter to his coworkers and friends. I had his ex-girlfriends crawling out of the woodwork telling me, his daughter, how they were so in love with him. I was posting to his Facebook as him letting everyone know what happened in detail and I still had people messaging him and calling his phone asking what was going on. I had a couple of people in particular hysterically question my decision to pull the plug. I had another woman try to start crap at his wake over politics. My boyfriend and puppy were at my home 3,000 miles away, both recovering from surgery. I had been in the middle of applying to grad school when this happened. I had to put my life entirely on hold for over a month. I was lucky in the sense that I had savings prior to all of this. I had help for dad's services from family pity donations, and I illegally sold my dad's illegal car. My job was also incredibly flexible, and I had enough PTO to last me almost the entire time I was in NY. My dad's girlfriend has also been awesome with looking after the house for me this entire time. I had resources that have reimbursed me, but quite frankly, this has cost me personally at least $20,000 up front, a luxury that most other 20-somethings don't have. TLDR. Make a ducking wall, assign beneficiaries and TODs, organize your paperwork and passwords, don't let your house turn into a 5+ man cleanup job, and earmark money for funeral, services, burial, cremation. Thanks for listening.